In the fall of 1857, an incident unfolded in Little Rock, Arkansas, that was so thoroughly buried by the local authorities, it took over a century for whispers of it to resurface. On Thanksgiving night within what was once the most opulent plantation home in Pulaski County, a slave named Samson is said to have killed his master with his bare hands, snapping Colonel Jeremiah Rutledge's neck like a twig. What sets this account apart from other stories of slave uprisings is the sheer strangeness of what witnesses claim to have seen that night. Samson's strength, they said, went beyond anything human. He crushed a man's skull with one hand, twisted iron tools into shapes like soft clay, and pressed his palms so deeply into the oak beams that the imprints remained for generations. The records were sealed, the witnesses silenced, and newspapers scrubbed clean of any mention. What truly occurred at Rutledge Plantation that Thanksgiving? And why did 3 separate county officials spend their remaining years insisting that what they had seen defied all rational explanation? Before we uncover the mystery of Samson and the secrets lying beneath Rutledge Plantation, if forgotten episodes like this fascinate you, make sure to subscribe and tell us in the comments what state you're listening from, because tonight's story might be closer to your hometown than you realize. Our story begins deep in the Arkansas Territory, roughly 20 miles south of Little Rock, where the Arkansas River winds lazily through some of the richest cotton country in the South. By 1857, Rutledge Plantation stretched across more than 3,000 acres, worked by nearly 200 enslaved men and women who lived under the looming shadow of Colonel Jeremiah Rutledge's grand Greek Revival mansion. The colonel himself was a peculiar figure, a lawyer from Massachusetts who had relocated south in his 20s, lured by the promise of fast wealth in the cotton trade. Unlike men born into the plantation system, Rutledge deliberately chose it, and perhaps because of that choice, he governed his land with a cold, calculated cruelty that unsettled even his peers. He meticulously documented every punishment, maintained breeding charts for his enslaved laborers, and approached slavery with what he called a scientific method. The enslaved community on the plantation was divided into 2 groups: the field workers who lived in rough-hewn cabins near the river, and the house servants who occupied slightly better quarters closer to the mansion. Their world was one of whispered conversations, covert traditions, and quiet survival strategies handed down through generations. Older members spoke of earlier, kinder days before Rutledge bought the property with northern money and southern ambitions. Among this group, Samson was a figure apart, not merely for his impressive stature, though at 6'4" he towered over nearly everyone, but because of his mysterious background. 3 years earlier, Rutledge had purchased Samson from a failing plantation in Louisiana. The bill of sale contained unusual notations: strong constitution, exceptional physical attributes, possible medical anomaly, buyer assumes all risk. The seller, a Frenchman named Boudreau, seemed almost relieved to part with Samson, despite his obvious worth as labor. Samson spoke little of his past, but others observed him carefully. He could toil 16 hours without faltering, hoisting cotton bales that usually required 2 men. His hands were thickly calloused, almost like hardened horn. The plantation blacksmith, Jupiter, swore he saw Samson bend horseshoes with his bare hands, though Samson made sure never to demonstrate such strength within the overseer's view. Yet it wasn't only his physical might that distinguished him. There was a sharpness in his gaze, a concealed literacy, a suggestion of education far beyond what enslaved people were permitted. Some claimed to see him late at night scratching strange symbols in the dirt outside his cabin. Not English letters, but something foreign, almost formulaic. Colonel Rutledge took a keen interest in him, not out of compassion but ambition. He'd heard the rumors of Samson's abilities and saw an opportunity for profit and scientific notoriety. Rutledge prided himself on being a man of learning, subscribing to phrenology journals and agricultural publications that theorized on human variation. He began subjecting Samson to what he called strength assessments, timing his labor, measuring his capacity, and recording everything in leather-bound journals locked away in his study. These tests took place in the old carriage house away from prying eyes. Samson would be ordered to lift increasingly massive objects, anvils, tree trunks, even pieces of heavy iron machinery, while Rutledge calculated and noted results. He was particularly obsessed with Samson's apparent lack of fatigue, pushing him for hours past the limits of normal men. By autumn's end, these experiments had grown darker, Rutledge began inviting wealthy neighbors to witness the demonstrations. Planters, businessmen, and scientists who traveled just to see the miracle slave capable of impossible feats. The shows included lifting contests and bending iron bars, all meant to display Samson like a prize. But as Thanksgiving approached, a change came over Samson. The other slaves noticed first, a simmering tension in his movements, a distant focus in his eyes, as if he were working through a complex plan. Jupiter later told investigators that Samson began asking subtle questions about the mansion's layout, the colonel's routines, and which house servants had access to which rooms. Meanwhile, preparations were underway for Rutledge's most elaborate Thanksgiving gathering yet. Over 40 guests from as far away as Memphis and New Orleans were invited, including several who requested to see Samson in action. Weeks of planning went into the menu, with delicacies shipped from Baltimore. And Rutledge had devised a special post-dinner exhibition starring Samson, one he claimed would astonish his guests and solidify his reputation as Arkansas's most progressive plantation owner. But he didn't know that Samson was listening. House servants overheard conversations about the planned spectacle. Some even glimpsed pages of Rutledge's private journals left open in his study. The entries spoke chillingly of terminal experiments, maximum threshold, and acceptable casualties in pursuit of scientific advancement. As Thanksgiving Day dawned crisp and clear across the Arkansas lowlands, both Samson and the colonel were preparing for a night that would end in blood. Neither could have foreseen that before the day was done, one would be dead and the other would vanish into the wilds of Arkansas, leaving Pulaski County with a mystery that would echo for generations. The holiday morning began like any other on the plantation, though the tension was palpable for those who noticed. By sunrise, the kitchen bustled with house servants under the sharp eye of Molly Kittenden, the head cook, preparing a feast to serve 50 guests in the grand dining hall. Samson was tasked with setting up the grounds, arranging additional seating on the wraparound veranda, and ensuring oil lamps were placed for the evening's spectacle. But his co-worker saw something different in him, a deliberate restraint, a strategic conserving of energy. His usual eagerness to handle the heaviest work had been replaced by measured, intentional movements. Rutledge spent the morning in his study, meticulously reviewing his notes for what he had privately named the Grand Demonstration. Journals found decades later during the mansion's demolition revealed his mindset. His final entry, penned carefully that morning, declared, "Today the specimen shall surpass all prior boundaries. Science demands nothing less than complete revelation." Carriages began rolling down the oak-lined drive at midday, bringing the elite of Arkansas society, Judge Cornelius Dillingham from Little Rock, planter Samuel Vaughn from Helena, and Dr. Nathaniel Payton from Memphis, renowned for his writings on racial physiology, all arrived. But the guest who drew the most intrigue was Professor Emanuel Voss, a German academic specializing in physical anthropology who had traveled from St. Louis just to witness Samson. As the sun sank lower and the guests sipped their pre-dinner drinks on the veranda, Samson moved through his duties with the quiet precision of a man following a carefully orchestrated plan. Jupiter the blacksmith later recounted to investigators that, when he attempted to make casual conversation with Samson around 3 in the afternoon, the towering man had fixed him with a gaze so distant and unfocused, it was as if Samson's eyes were looking straight through him, his mind clearly far away. The evening meal itself passed uneventfully. Guests indulged in a grand feast: roasted turkey, sugar-cured ham, cornbread stuffing, and an assortment of fresh autumn vegetables. Skilled cooks moved silently between kitchen and dining room, ensuring everything arrived at the perfect moment without drawing attention to themselves. The talk flowed as smoothly as the wine, centering on cotton markets, regional politics, and the mounting rift between North and South that, within 4 years, would erupt into war. As the night approached its peak, Colonel Jeremiah Rutledge rose from his seat, cheeks flushed with drink and excitement. "Gentlemen," he declared, his voice rising above the conversations, "tonight you will witness something that defies the boundaries of what we believe human beings can achieve. My specimen, Samson, will perform acts that would have been dismissed as impossible only a generation ago." With a sense of anticipation and skepticism mingling in the air, the guests followed him outside toward the old carriage house. Torches encircled the building, their flames casting restless shadows against the weathered wooden boards. Inside, the space had been cleared out, leaving only a collection of testing equipment, iron rods of varying thickness, heavy wooden beams, and several pieces of railroad iron arranged on sturdy blocks. Samson was already waiting there. His massive silhouette stood stark against the torchlight. Yet it wasn't just his size that drew attention. It was the way he stood, the precise set of his shoulders, the tilt of his head, that suggested a mental and physical readiness far beyond mere brute strength. Dr. Nathaniel Peaton, a physician from Memphis, would later record in his private diary that seeing Samson that night was like watching a coiled spring held on the verge of snapping. All that power was gathered, contained, and ready to be unleashed. Colonel Rutledge began with his usual array of demonstrations. Samson hoisted weights that should have been immovable by any man, twisted thick iron rods as though they were soft wire, and shattered sturdy oak beams with his bare hands. The guests watched in astonishment. Professor Voss, the visiting academic, scribbled rapidly in his notebook, muttering in German and occasionally asking that certain feats be repeated for observation. But as the evening drew on, the colonel's commands grew bolder and more demanding. He urged Samson to lift increasingly heavier loads, to bend thicker iron, to break denser wood. What had initially seemed like a display of extraordinary strength slowly took on the air of deliberate torment, a calculated pushing of limits under the guise of science. Uneasy murmurs spread among the crowd as they realized they were witnessing something far more unsettling than a mere exhibition. It was Judge Cornelius Dillingham who first noticed the shift in Samson's expression. When Rutledge commanded him to lift what appeared to be a section of railroad track, something inside Samson visibly changed. His previously restrained compliance vanished. The measured, obedient demeanor slipped away, replaced by a presence so intense it caused the judge to step back without thinking. "Colonel," Dillingham said softly, "perhaps that's enough for tonight." But Rutledge, exhilarated by the spectacle and the attention, waved him off. "Nonsense. We're just approaching the most fascinating thresholds." He motioned toward an immense object that had been wheeled in earlier, the iron flywheel of a cotton gin, weighing at least 400 pounds. Samson stared at it for a long, still moment. His eyes then shifted to Rutledge, then to the ring of expectant faces surrounding him. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, so quiet that several guests leaned forward to catch the words. "No, sir." The refusal struck the room like a blow. In the antebellum South, a slave openly defying a master's order was not merely shocking. It was an offense that demanded swift and brutal punishment. Yet something in Samson's tone and posture made every man present hesitate. Colonel Rutledge's face cycled from shock to anger, finally settling on a cold fury unlike anything his guests had seen in him before. "What did you say?" he demanded. Samson met his gaze. "I said no, sir." His voice was steady, but beneath it was an unmistakable force that made Professor Voss stop writing mid-sentence and made Dillingham retreat another step. "You will do as I command," Rutledge hissed, his rage barely contained, "or you'll face consequences far worse than anything you've endured before." For a long moment, the two men stood facing each other across the torch-lit floor, their standoff stretching unbearably. Then Samson smiled. Those who later recounted the night swore they had never witnessed a smile so chilling. "No, sir," he said once more, his voice perfectly calm. "I don't believe I will." What happened next occurred with such breathtaking speed that most witnesses struggled to comprehend it afterward. Samson surged forward with astonishing grace for a man of his size, crossing the distance to Rutledge in 3 swift strides. The colonel barely had time to lift his hands defensively, perhaps to shout or beg, but certainly not to escape. The sound that followed, a sharp, resonant crack, was compared by witnesses to the breaking of a thick tree branch in a storm. It would echo in their memories for the rest of their lives. Colonel Jeremiah Rutledge, owner of thousands of acres and nearly 200 enslaved people, died instantly. Samson had snapped his neck with an ease that horrified everyone present, as if breaking a twig. For a heartbeat, time seemed frozen. Samson stood over Rutledge's body, his immense hands still positioned as though cradling something fragile that had just shattered. Then he slowly lifted his gaze to the ring of pale, terrified faces. When he spoke, his voice was clear, articulate, and refined, bearing an educated accent that none of them could place. "Gentlemen," he said evenly, I suggest you leave now." Panic erupted. Prominent figures of Arkansas society abandoned their dignity, trampling each other in their frenzy to reach their carriages and flee the plantation. Within moments, the grounds were deserted, save for the slaves confined to their quarters, the corpse of their former master and Samson, standing alone among the scattered apparatus and guttering torches. What transpired in the hours that followed remains one of the enduring enigmas of that dreadful night. The house slaves, terrified and unsure of what to do, stayed inside their quarters until daylight. When dawn came and they finally ventured out, the carriage house stood empty. The torches had burned to ash. The colonel's body had vanished. So had Samson. It was as if both man and corpse had been erased from existence, leaving behind only the deep impressions of Samson's hands embedded in oak beams, and a plantation full of people suddenly without leadership or any sense of what to do next. Samson's disappearance, and the absence of the colonel's body, was just the beginning. Messengers were immediately dispatched to Little Rock. Telegrams flew. Officials poured onto the plantation grounds. What they found would trigger months of investigation and leave questions that linger to this day. The news spread quickly by dawn on November 27th, traveling through the intricate network of plantation owners, overseers, and county officials who formed the core of Arkansas's elite. The implications were staggering. Not only had a slave killed his master, but the killer had disappeared completely, leaving behind traumatized witnesses. Judge Dillingham returned to Little Rock in such a state of nervous collapse that his clerk described him as utterly broken. Dr. Peaton checked himself into a sanitarium and refused to speak of the events for over a year. Professor Voss simply vanished, leaving behind his hotel room and a trunk filled with pages of notes, a baffling mix of German text and strange mathematical symbols no one could decipher. At first light, Sheriff Thomas Breege arrived with armed deputies and a small militia from Little Rock, expecting to find signs of a violent uprising or some clue to Samson's flight. Instead, what they encountered was something eerier, a plantation where everything seemed to have simply halted. The house slaves, when questioned, gave accounts that were eerily consistent but frustratingly unhelpful. Yes, they heard raised voices from the carriage house. No, they hadn't gone to investigate. They had long since learned not to interfere in their master's affairs. Yes, they saw lights moving about during the night, but from their quarters they couldn't tell who was carrying them or where they were headed. Most puzzling of all was their description of Samson. They agreed he was tall and strong, but when asked about his behavior, personality, or connections with other slaves, their answers grew vague and evasive. It was as if they were either intentionally hiding something or genuinely unsure who Samson truly was. Jupiter, the blacksmith of the plantation, turned out to be the most cooperative witness, though his testimony only deepened the mystery rather than resolving it. When questioned by Sheriff Breege, he eventually confessed that Samson possessed a kind of strength that far exceeded anything an ordinary man should have been able to achieve. Yet when the sheriff pressed him for precise details, Jupiter's statements took on an increasingly unsettling tone. He could labor from sunrise to sunset without showing a hint of exhaustion, Jupiter explained, his hands fidgeting nervously in his lap. But it wasn't natural tired, you understand? It was like he was driven by something different, something not like the rest of us. His voice faltered, and he swallowed before continuing. And sometimes, late at night, I'd see him doing things that didn't make sense to me. The sheriff leaned forward. What kinds of things? Breege asked. He'd be down in the dirt working with numbers, Jupiter said slowly, scratching them out with a stick. But they weren't numbers like I've ever seen before. And sometimes he'd be talking to himself, but not in English. It was some other language, something strange. He paused again, visibly struggling to put his observations into words. It sounded like he was giving commands, not just mumbling, like he was used to telling people what to do. The physical evidence left behind on the plantation only added to the strangeness. Inside the carriage house were scattered weights, twisted iron rods, splintered beams, all consistent with the previous night's brutal display. Yet there was no trace of blood despite the violence that had claimed Colonel Rutledge's life. Even more baffling was the absence of any clear tracks. The earth outside was soft enough to hold impressions, but no footprints led away from the building. And perhaps most troubling of all, the colonel's body was nowhere to be found. Sheriff Breach immediately organized search parties that fanned out across the Arkansas bottomlands in every direction. They dragged nearby ponds, scoured abandoned cabins, combed through thickets, and followed creeks and rivers for nearly 20 miles. But Samson had disappeared as if swallowed by the landscape, leaving no trace behind. As the days bled into weeks, the investigation took on an increasingly frantic edge. Governor Elias Conway, under mounting pressure from influential plantation owners, issued a proclamation offering a $500 reward for any information that might lead to Samson's capture, a fortune in that era. The bounty drew hunters and mercenaries from as far away as New Orleans and Memphis. Posters began appearing across Arkansas and neighboring states, describing the fugitive in the broadest, most impersonal terms imaginable. A large, black male, approximately 6 feet 4 inches tall, with an extraordinarily powerful build. He was said to answer to the name Samson and was labeled extremely dangerous. Approach with caution. As the manhunt dragged on, however, unsettling reports began to trickle in. Several bounty hunters claimed to have encountered eerie signs, deep in the Arkansas wilderness. Fleeting glimpses of a massive figure moving through the trees at night, campsites that looked as though they'd been occupied by someone of immense physical power, trees wrenched from the ground or bent in ways no ordinary man could manage. Even more disturbing were the whispers spreading among plantations across the state. A landowner near Pine Bluff reported that his slaves had begun behaving strangely, whispering in secret groups and displaying what he called a dangerous, excited energy. Another planter near Helena claimed his overseer abruptly quit after hearing slaves speak of a mysterious figure known only as the Strong Man, who they said was coming to make things right. By Christmas of 1857, the search for Samson had devolved into an embarrassing spectacle for Arkansas law enforcement. The generous reward, the influx of bounty hunters, even the involvement of federal marshals, all had yielded nothing. Samson was as elusive as the night he vanished. Meanwhile, sensational accounts began appearing in northern newspapers, painting Samson as an Arkansas Superman who had slain his master and vanished into the wilderness like a ghost. Faced with growing political fallout, Governor Conway moved swiftly to contain the damage. Concerned that the case might inflame sectional tensions between North and South, he ordered all official records of the investigation sealed. The reward was rescinded, wanted posters were quietly removed, and editors were urged to stop printing stories about the affair. The most shocking revelations, however, came not from law enforcement but from the personal files of the deceased Colonel Rutledge. When his estate was finally settled in early 1858, the executors discovered a false bottom in his desk that had been overlooked during the initial search. Hidden within were documents that revealed the colonel's interest in Samson was far more complex than mere curiosity about physical strength. Among the papers was an extensive correspondence with several northern universities. The letters discussed human experimentation and methods of physical enhancement in startling detail. There were receipts for chemical compounds ordered from laboratories in Boston and New York, substances whose names were meaningless to local officials, but hinted at scientific or medical experimentation. There was also a bill of lading from a New Orleans shipping company, dated just 2 weeks before Samson's arrival, for the transport of specialized pharmaceutical equipment and related materials. The final document in the hidden cache was the most alarming of all, a signed contract with a Boston-based organization known as Meridian Research Associates. The agreement described ongoing physiological assessment and enhancement protocols. It bore the signatures of Colonel Rutledge and someone identified only as Subject S. Several house slaves later confirmed that the handwriting of Subject S belonged to Samson himself. These discoveries raised questions no one in Arkansas wanted to confront. Had Samson been the subject of some sort of scientific experiment? Was Rutledge collaborating with northern researchers to create enhanced humans? And if so, what did that mean for the terrifying events of that Thanksgiving night? The official reaction was immediate and decisive. The documents were classified as sensitive estate material, sealed by court order, and transferred into federal custody. The estate's executors were sworn to silence. The slaves who had recognized Samson's handwriting were discreetly sold to distant plantations, ensuring their voices would not be heard again. Any mention of Meridian Research Associates was erased from official archives, but the story refused to die. Rumors began spreading through clandestine networks that connected slave communities across the South. Tales circulated of a strong man who had shattered his chains and disappeared into the wilderness, of shadowy government experiments and northern conspiracies. Whispers spread that other plantations might harbor similar subjects, and speculation grew about what might happen if they, too, decided to resist. By the start of 1858, the Samson case officially no longer existed. There were no public records, no reward, no ongoing investigation. Yet in the slave quarters across the South, in private letters between anxious landowners, and in sealed files in federal offices in Washington, the questions born that Thanksgiving night continued to fester. And deep within the forests of the Arkansas Territory, those who claimed to have glimpsed him swore Samson was still alive, growing stronger, biding his time, waiting for something greater. The mystery only deepened as spring arrived. New developments hinted that the story of Samson was far from over. The first indication came from an unexpected quarter, the Pinkerton Detective Agency. Without public announcement, private individuals hired the agency to conduct its own investigation into the Thanksgiving night events. In March, Alan Pinkerton himself arrived in Little Rock, flanked by 2 seasoned operatives. Unlike the local authorities, who had focused solely on tracking Samson's movements after the killing, the Pinkertons were interested in the events leading up to his arrival at Rutland Plantation. Their work led them down a trail stretching through Louisiana and Mississippi, ultimately uncovering evidence that pointed towards several northeastern medical institutions. These facilities, according to their findings, had been engaged in what they delicately termed human improvement research. The Pinkertons began by examining the original bill of sale that had transferred Samson to Arkansas, an unassuming document that would prove to be the first thread in a much larger, more disturbing tapestry. Detective James Hawthorne, operating undercover as a prospective slave purchaser, journeyed to Louisiana to confront the original seller, a Frenchman named Boudreau. What he unearthed during his visit was profoundly disturbing. Boudreau's plantation, situated deep within the bayou country south of New Orleans, had served as a covert testing ground for extensive medical experimentation conducted under the guise of a program called the Southern Health Initiative. Officially, this initiative claimed to focus on researching diseases prevalent among enslaved populations, but in reality, it functioned as a cover for trials involving chemical compounds and medical procedures aimed at enhancing human physical abilities. From the moment Samson's name was mentioned, Boudreau's demeanor shifted. The Frenchman grew visibly uneasy, Hawthorne noted in his confidential report to Pinkerton. Boudreau repeatedly asserted that all known risks had been disclosed in the bill of sale and that he bore no responsibility for any subsequent consequences. Yet when Hawthorne applied pressure, Boudreau reluctantly admitted that Samson had participated in what he referred to as the enhancement protocol for more than 2 years prior to his sale. According to Boudreau, the Southern Health Initiative had been financed by a coalition of northern investors interested in developing more efficient and obedient labor forces. The experiments involved a combination of chemical exposure, strictly monitored physical conditioning routines, and what they called nutritional optimization protocols. Most subjects displayed moderate gains in strength and endurance. A few experienced extraordinary improvements, and a rare handful, including Samson, began exhibiting abilities that seemed to defy ordinary human limitations. But these enhancements came with troubling consequences. Boudreau confided that many of the modified individuals grew increasingly independent. They became harder to control, began questioning authority, and in some cases exhibited intellectual growth that unsettled their overseers. Samson proved to be one of the most extreme examples, either the most dangerous or the most successful, depending on one's perspective. Within months, he had learned to read and write, mastered advanced mathematical concepts, and started asking probing questions about the treatments being administered to him. The Louisiana experiments were abruptly terminated in 1854, following a revolt during which several enhanced subjects escaped, leaving 3 overseers dead. While most fugitives were eventually recaptured and quietly eliminated, a select few, including Samson, were sold off to distant plantations, with contracts carefully worded to conceal their extraordinary traits. This revelation propelled the Pinkerton investigators to trace the northern links of the Southern Health Initiative, uncovering a complex network of laboratories, research institutions, and private facilities engaged in similar enhancement experiments throughout the 1840s and 1850s. Funding came from a blend of private capital, government contracts, and military interests seeking to engineer stronger, more resilient soldiers for potential future conflicts. At the center of this web was Dr. Marcus Kleinman, a German immigrant who had established cutting-edge research centers in Boston, Philadelphia, and Baltimore. Kleinman's field of study, which he termed human optimization, relied on a fusion of chemical treatments, intensive physical regimens, and psychological manipulation to create individuals with enhanced capabilities. His test subjects were drawn from prisons, immigrant populations, and increasingly enslaved individuals purchased explicitly for experimentation. Detective Sarah Chen, one of Pinkerton's most resourceful female operatives, infiltrated Kleinman's Boston laboratory by posing as a nurse seeking work. Her reports revealed the staggering scale and sophistication of the program. The facility meticulously documented over 200 subjects who had undergone different levels of enhancement procedures. The success rate varies greatly, she wrote, depending on physical health, psychological stability, and what they call genetic compatibility. Successful subjects displayed strength increases of 50% to as much as 300% above baseline human capacity. The most chilling revelations emerged when Chen accessed Kleinman's private correspondence. She discovered that Kleinman had been in regular communication with Colonel Rutledge, receiving comprehensive updates on Samson's development and providing instructions on maximizing his abilities. Even more alarming, the letters exposed that Rutledge's infamous Thanksgiving night demonstration had been orchestrated with Kleinman's input as a critical stress test designed to push Samson beyond all known psychological limits. "The subject has reached the boundary of our present comprehension," one letter read. "Your demonstration will yield essential data about the breaking points of enhanced individuals." The military implications are immense. The final pieces of the puzzle came from an unexpected informant, Jupiter, the plantation blacksmith. Maintaining contact with several Pinkerton operatives through a network of free blacks in Little Rock, Jupiter revealed in late April that Samson's disappearance had not been spontaneous. It had been meticulously planned. He had been preparing for months, Jupiter explained during a clandestine meeting. There were people who knew about him, people who were waiting for the right moment. That night wasn't random. It was deliberate. Others helped him. This intelligence led to the discovery of a vast underground movement known as the Freedom Chain, an organization made up of abolitionists, free blacks, and sympathetic whites. Operating since the early 1850s, the Freedom Chain had been aiding enhanced subjects in their escapes, guiding them toward Canada, Mexico, or isolated areas within the American wilderness. The network had perfected techniques to conceal tracks, fabricate new identities, and train the enhanced individuals to regulate their abilities, allowing them to integrate into ordinary society undetected. However, the most shocking turn came in May of 1858, when Hawthorne uncovered evidence of foreign infiltration within the Freedom Chain. Documents seized during a raid on a suspected safe house in Memphis revealed correspondence with British and French intelligence agents eager to acquire knowledge of American enhancement programs. "The consequences are staggering," Pinkerton wrote in his final report to his shadowy clients. "The enhancement initiative has not only produced individuals exceeding natural human capabilities but has also drawn the interest of foreign powers who see military potential. If figures like Samson had indeed been smuggled overseas, the United States could soon face adversaries wielding powers it neither understood nor controlled." The Pinkerton investigation was quietly shut down in June 1858. Its reports were classified, and its operatives reassigned to unrelated missions. Yet the questions it had uncovered lingered in Washington's corridors, unsettling military planners and government scientists alike. Meanwhile, Stories continued to drift in from across the Arkansas Territory and beyond. Witnesses reported fleeting encounters with a towering figure moving through forests at night, accounts of a mysterious benefactor aiding fugitives, and Native American legends describing a man of extraordinary strength and speed, who acted with compassion rather than rage. At the decaying remains of Rutledge Plantation, now slowly reclaimed by wilderness, travelers spoke of strange occurrences. Deep handprints in oak beams that seemed to deepen over time, patches of earth compressed as if by immense weight and on windless nights, the faint echo of movement in the abandoned carriage house, like a colossal being testing his power in secret. By the fall of 1858, a year after the fateful Thanksgiving night, the Samson affair had transcended its origins as a local manhunt. It had become a sprawling mystery that touched on science, politics, slavery, espionage, and the future of humanity itself. The questions now went far beyond Samson's whereabouts. They centered on his identity, the true nature of what had been done to him, and what his survival and freedom might mean for a nation hurtling toward a defining conflict over the very essence of human bondage and liberty. Just when it seemed like we had witnessed everything, the terror unfolding in Arkansas took a far darker turn. If this story is sending shivers down your spine, make sure to share this video with a friend who enjoys unsettling mysteries. Tap the like button to support our work and subscribe so you never miss a story like this again. Stay with us because the most chilling truths have yet to be revealed. The autumn of 1858 set off a chain of events that would permanently alter the perception and fear surrounding the Samson case among those in positions of power. What began as scattered reports of bizarre phenomena across Arkansas and neighboring states slowly formed into a coherent pattern, one that hinted at a highly organized and dangerous movement, far more threatening than a lone fugitive hiding in the wilderness. The first major incident struck in October near Camden, a town in southern Arkansas. There, on the plantation of Marcus Henley, one of the most influential cotton producers in the state, a night of unexplainable horror unfolded. Henley had recently purchased 3 enslaved men from a Louisiana dealer. The bill of sale described them with the same cryptic markings once used for Samson: unusual physical abilities and a possible medical anomaly. On the night of October 15th, these 3 men, known only by the plantation records as Caesar, Goliath, and Titan, simultaneously broke free from the most fortified holding structure on the plantation. But this was no ordinary escape. According to the surviving overseer, James Huckabee, the 3 men didn't simply break their locks, they shattered their shackles with their bare hands, bending thick iron like clay. "I've managed slaves for 20 years, Huckabee told investigators, and I've never seen anything like that night. He described how they moved through the darkness as if they could see perfectly, working together with a level of coordination that seemed the result of long, meticulous planning, not a few days of scheming. Their strength, he said, was beyond human. That night, the 3 enhanced men systematically destroyed every restraint device on the plantation, not just their own bonds, but every lock, chain, and iron bar that could hold a person captive. They carried out this operation in total silence, avoiding detection from house slaves and guards until the moment they chose to act. When they finally escaped, they didn't just take their freedom. They carried with them detailed local maps they had somehow obtained, along with supplies that hinted at a journey far beyond the next county. The Camden escape marked only the beginning. Within weeks, plantations across the region reported similar events. In Mississippi, 2 enhanced subjects broke out of a research facility near Natchez, leaving behind twisted metal and shattered wood sculptures that had once been equipment. In Louisiana, 4 enhanced individuals escaped a supposedly inescapable holding center, but not before deliberately destroying every document and research note linked to the enhancement program. The pattern became undeniable and terrifying. These weren't random escapees acting independently. The enhanced individuals were being organized and directed by some central intelligence that knew exactly where they were held and how to liberate them. Even more disturbing was their apparent knowledge of the enhancement program itself. They targeted particular sites and eliminated specific types of records with calculated precision, proof of insider-level intelligence. In November, Dr. Marcus Kleinman, a German scientist key to developing the enhancement methods, arrived in Little Rock to assist federal officials in grappling with the growing emergency. His findings were grim and his tone increasingly alarmed. "We are confronting subjects who have been fundamentally changed, not only physically but mentally," he warned in a confidential military briefing. The enhancement procedures had produced individuals whose abilities exceeded original expectations. They demonstrated strategic thinking, coordination, and problem-solving on a level suggesting that enhanced intelligence itself had emerged. Even more unsettling were Kleinman's psychological observations. His studies revealed that the chemical and physical augmentations didn't just increase strength and stamina, they appeared to dismantle certain cognitive limitations inherent to normal humans. The enhanced exhibited extraordinary memory, accelerated learning, and, most disturbingly, a kind of shared consciousness that enabled them to coordinate across vast distances. "We may have inadvertently created a new kind of human," Kleinman admitted in his classified report, "one that perceives ordinary humans not as equals, but as lesser beings. The consequences for social control, slavery, and the entire societal hierarchy were catastrophic." Meanwhile, the hunt for Samson intensified. Authorities now suspected he was not just another escapee, but possibly the mastermind coordinating the enhanced network across the Arkansas Territory. Witnesses reported seeing an impossibly tall figure appearing at plantations and facilities shortly before mass escapes, seemingly gathering intelligence for future operations. Bounty hunter Thomas Bogard, who had been pursuing enhanced subjects since Camden, gave the most detailed account of encountering Samson. In late November, while tracking footprints near the Buffalo River in northern Arkansas, he claimed to have confronted the fugitive in a secluded canyon. "He was standing on a ledge 30 feet above me," Bogard told federal marshals, "and I knew instantly this wasn't someone I could bring in alive." The man's size was inhuman, close to 7 feet tall, with the build of someone capable of uprooting a tree, but what truly terrified him were Samson's eyes. "He looked at me like he was calculating exactly how long it would take to kill me, and whether I was worth the effort." Bogard recounted that Samson spoke flawless English with an educated accent. "He told me I was chasing the wrong prey," Bogard said. He said men like him weren't the problem, we were. That people had been treated like property, like animals to be experimented on and discarded, and that it was all going to change whether we liked it or not. The encounter ended without violence only because Samson chose to retreat. He stepped backward off the ledge, and when Bogard climbed up moments later, Samson had vanished without a trace, except for the deep handprints embedded in the stone where he had stood. By December 1858, the crisis surrounding enhanced subjects had grown so severe that President James Buchanan received regular briefings on what his advisors began calling the Samson crisis. The stakes were immense, not only immediate security threats, but broader debates over human experimentation, states' rights, and slavery that were already fracturing the nation. Military planners began drafting strategies for enhanced subject containment operations. But these efforts quickly faltered as a harsh truth emerged. No one knew exactly how many enhanced individuals existed, where they were located, or what they were truly capable of. The programs had been carried out in extreme secrecy, with little oversight and no centralized records. "We may have created a threat," General Winfield Scott warned in a confidential memo to the War Department, "that we are fundamentally unprepared to confront." These individuals possessed not only superior strength, but also tactical brilliance, making them nearly impossible to track or contain. If a figure like Samson was indeed orchestrating their efforts, the situation resembled a superhuman insurgency. The year ended with a final, shocking event. On New Year's Eve, a secret military research facility buried deep in Tennessee's Cumberland Mountains, unknown even to the president, was attacked. The site had been experimenting on volunteer soldiers, enhancing their abilities in exchange for promises of increased power. That night, witnesses described a precisely executed assault by a group of enhanced individuals, led by someone matching Samson's description. This was not a chaotic rampage. It was a surgical strike. They knew exactly where everything was, testified Major William Kittenden, the base commander. The attackers disabled communications first, then methodically destroyed research materials and freed the test subjects. The entire operation lasted less than 2 hours, and not a single person was killed. But the attackers made it clear that their restraint was a choice, not a limitation. They could have slaughtered everyone had they wished. The most unsettling element of the Tennessee assault was the message deliberately left behind. Carved into the wall of the main laboratory in 2-inch deep letters was a chilling proclamation that would linger in the minds of government officials for years to come. The chains are broken. The strong shall no longer serve the weak. A new age begins. Below it was a single symbol, a pair of broken shackles that investigators would later find had been left at every location where enhanced individuals had either escaped or been liberated. It was now undeniable that what had begun as scattered, seemingly isolated acts of resistance had transformed into a structured, dangerous movement, a calculated uprising led by people whose abilities surpassed anything previously encountered in human history. As 1859 dawned upon a nation already splintering along the divide between slavery and freedom, the Samson crisis emerged as a new and unprecedented threat to the established social order. The enhanced individuals weren't merely fleeing to claim their own liberty. They appeared intent on dismantling the entire system of bondage and experimentation that had given birth to them. Deep within the untamed American frontier, Samson and his growing force of enhanced followers were preparing for their next strategic move. What was becoming increasingly clear was less a series of opportunistic escapes and more the opening act of a coordinated war. This conflict would confront and unravel everything Americans thought they understood about human nature, human rights, and the terrible cost of reducing people to commodities to be bought, altered, and controlled. The full scale of the Samson conspiracy would come to light in the spring of 1859, in a location no one had foreseen, the capital of the United States itself. What started as a routine inquiry into irregularities in government contracts would erupt into a crisis reaching the highest levels of federal authority, threatening to reveal secrets so explosive that powerful men had killed to keep them buried. The investigation began when Congressman Joshua Giddings of Ohio, a staunch opponent of slavery, received an anonymous parcel. Inside were documents exposing the entirety of the enhancement program. The contents were staggering: hundreds of pages of letters, financial statements, medical data, and research records traced a vast web of human experimentation spanning from Louisiana's bayous to Boston's laboratories. This network was funded through an intricate mix of federal contracts, private investments, and military appropriations. Among the most damning revelations was a comprehensive roster, documenting nearly a decade of human enhancement experiments. Over 300 names were listed alongside their locations, levels of enhancement, and their current status: captured, escaped, or terminated. At the very top, marked with special symbols denoting both the highest enhancement level and leadership of an active resistance, was the name that had come to define the entire crisis: Samson. Realizing the magnitude of what he held, Giddings immediately demanded congressional hearings to investigate what he called the systematic enslavement and torture of human beings under the guise of scientific progress. His demands were fiercely contested by Southern legislators, who argued that any such investigation infringed upon states' rights and interfered with legitimate agricultural innovation. But Northern representatives, equally horrified by the revelations, rallied to his side. By April 1859, a special committee had been formed to launch an official inquiry into the enhancement program. The first public hearing, held on April 21st inside the Capitol building, drew massive crowds and unprecedented press attention. Dr. Marcus Kleinman, subpoenaed to testify about his role in the program, gave testimony that stunned even those who thought they were prepared for shocking revelations. Speaking with a thick German accent, Kleinman explained that the enhancement protocols had initially been conceived as a humanitarian initiative. "We believed," he testified, "that by improving the physical capabilities of enslaved individuals, we could reduce their suffering by making their labor less grueling and more efficient. We never intended to create what ultimately emerged." Under intense questioning, Kleinman laid bare the full evolution of the program. What began as attempts to improve health and endurance gradually escalated into full-fledged human modification experiments. Enhanced subjects were subjected to increasingly extreme treatments, pushed far beyond ethical boundaries, until they developed abilities that surpassed normal human limits. Kleinman admitted that the subject known as Samson was both their greatest success and their gravest mistake. His strength measured roughly 4 times that of an average human. His intelligence exceeded their most ambitious forecasts, and his psychological assessments revealed leadership, qualities that made him wholly unfit for continued enslavement. The most damning moment came when Kleinman revealed that the program had expanded far beyond the enslaved population. Prisoners, immigrants, and even volunteer soldiers had been drawn into experiments without being properly informed of the risks. What had started as morally dubious research on an oppressed group had metastasized into a sprawling apparatus of unethical human experimentation that violated fundamental principles of medical ethics and individual rights. The second day of hearings shifted focus to military and intelligence applications. Behind closed doors, General Winfield Scott disclosed that the War Department had been secretly funding enhancement research since 1852, with the intent of producing soldiers capable of surviving extreme environments and performing superhuman feats. Enhanced individuals showed remarkable promise for covert operations, reconnaissance, and specialized combat roles. But, Scott testified, the psychological transformations accompanying physical enhancement rendered them incompatible with military discipline. They became insubordinate, independent-minded, and increasingly drawn to causes that clashed with government objectives. Scott revealed that the Army had attempted to create its own enhanced operatives from volunteer soldiers, but the program collapsed in chaos. Desertion rates soared as enhanced soldiers abandoned their posts, often stealing classified intelligence. Several were court-martialed for defying orders. At least 2 were executed for mutiny. By 1857, the military program was officially shut down, but dozens of enhanced individuals remained unaccounted for. The hearings reached their dramatic peak on April 25th, when the committee received a message from Samson himself. Delivered through secret intermediaries, the statement was formally read into the congressional record and published nationwide. To the representatives of the American people, it began, I write to you not as a former slave, not as a fugitive, but as a free man who has broken the chains that bound not only my body, but my mind and spirit. Samson condemned the systematic dehumanization he and others had endured, describing how men had been treated as property, experimented on, and reshaped to serve others' ambitions. He recounted his capture, his sale, and his awakening to the horrifying nature of the program. The most striking section of the statement, however, addressed the broader moral rot at the heart of American society. Through enhancement, Samson wrote, we gained not only strength but clarity. We have seen how swiftly human beings are reduced to property when it benefits economic power. We have witnessed how science is perverted to justify cruelty. We have learned that the principles of freedom and equality this nation proclaims are applied selectively, dictated by power and profit rather than moral truth. The statement concluded with a declaration that reverberated through the halls of power, shaking the Capitol to its core. We, the enhanced individuals who have shattered the bonds of our captivity, do not seek vengeance upon those who engineered our existence. What we seek is justice. We call for the immediate and unconditional termination of every human enhancement initiative. We insist upon the liberation of all subjects currently confined within research institutions, and we demand to be acknowledged as free human beings, endowed with the same rights and liberties as any other American citizen. Should these demands be ignored, we are prepared to take whatever measures are necessary to secure not only our freedom but the freedom of every individual subjected to these experiments. The declaration bore not only Samson's signature but also those of over 50 enhanced individuals, transforming it into a formal proclamation of independence issued by a group whose abilities made them an unprecedented threat if they chose to wield violence. The reaction among Southern legislators was swift and uncompromising. They demanded an all-out campaign to track down and subdue the enhanced, no matter the cost. Northern legislators, many already aligned with abolitionist causes, regarded the enhanced individuals' appeals as fundamentally legitimate, though their extraordinary abilities inspired fear. The sharp division over how to handle the Samson crisis became yet another fracture driving the nation toward civil war. President Buchanan, caught between competing pressures, authorized a nationwide manhunt to locate and neutralize the enhanced individuals. Military detachments were dispatched to suspected hideouts, while bounties were raised to record levels. A specialized federal task force was formed to oversee the apprehension or elimination of what officials now referred to as enhanced insurgents. Yet as these measures were enacted, new reports surfaced indicating that the enhanced were no longer merely retreating into remote wilderness. They were being sighted near major urban centers: Washington, Philadelphia, New York, Charleston, conducting reconnaissance on government facilities, military strongholds, and research compounds. The crisis reached its pivotal moment on May 15, 1859, when Samson himself appeared in Washington, D.C. He made no attempt at concealment. Towering above the crowd, his imposing stature rendered him unmistakable. Eyewitnesses recounted that he moved through the Capitol streets with unwavering composure, utterly unafraid of capture. His destination was the Capitol building, where he requested an audience with the Congressional Committee investigating the enhancement program. The request was summarily denied. Samson was a fugitive slave accused of multiple killings, not a recognized political envoy. But his very presence in the nation's seat of power sent a shockwave. The enhanced were no longer fugitives. They were challengers. Samson's visit to Washington ended peacefully, but its consequences were profound. Before his departure, he left a final message carved into the Capitol's marble steps. The words were simple yet earth-shaking in meaning. The experiment is over. The specimens have become the scientists. By nightfall, Samson had disappeared without a trace, leaving only the deep, unmistakable gouges that testified to his superhuman power, and the undeniable truth that the enhanced had ceased to be passive subjects. They were now active agents with the strength to confront their creators head-on. The Samson crisis had reached its climax, a direct, unambiguous standoff between the enhanced population and the government that had brought them into being. The resolution that followed did not emerge from a violent showdown or dramatic public reckoning. Instead, it unfolded through a series of clandestine negotiations that would quietly reshape federal policy on human experimentation and set lasting precedents. Conducted in secret from June through the late summer of 1859, these discussions progressed even as the nation moved steadily toward civil war. The turning point came when President Buchanan, recognizing that a military approach would result in immense bloodshed and unwanted publicity, authorized Secretary of War John Floyd to initiate indirect communications with Samson and his envoys. The talks were carried out through a discreet network involving abolitionist leaders, sympathetic to the enhanced cause, and federal officials who acknowledged that brute force alone could not resolve the conflict. Samson's counter-proposal, relayed through these intermediaries, revealed not only strategic acumen but also legal sophistication. He did not call for revenge. He outlined a comprehensive resolution aimed at diffusing the current crisis while ensuring that such abuses could never recur. The resulting arrangement, later referred to as the Washington Compact, though its existence was never officially admitted, contained several core provisions. It mandated the immediate cessation of all human enhancement research under federal authority, the destruction of research archives and subject records, and the creation of new identities with financial support for enhanced individuals choosing to assimilate into society. Crucially, it established a separate settlement in the remote wilderness of Alaska, then still under Russian control, for those who wished to form independent communities away from mainstream society. The agreement required delicate international diplomacy, with Russian officials cooperating to cultivate favorable relations ahead of Alaska's eventual sale to the United States. Dr. Marcus Kleinman, whose congressional testimony had exposed the scope of the enhancement program, became pivotal in finalizing the compact. Granted immunity in exchange for cooperation, he provided medical data that allowed government physicians to develop treatments enabling enhanced individuals to diminish their abilities and reintegrate into ordinary life. Not all accepted this path, but many did, aided by carefully designed identity changes and financial assistance. Executing the Washington Compact required extensive secrecy and coordination. Enhanced individuals across the nation were covertly contacted through the same underground networks that had shielded them from capture. They were presented with clear choices: assimilation through medical and legal reinvention, or relocation to the Alaskan Territory. Samson personally oversaw the process, ensuring that every enhanced individual was offered a genuine future. In his final communique to federal negotiators, delivered in August 1859, Samson articulated his stance with the clarity and moral weight that had defined his leadership. "I will not live among those who regard people like me as property or instruments," he wrote. "But I will not condone needless suffering on either side. This agreement provides a way forward that honors autonomy and prevents further cruelty. May future generations learn from these mistakes and treat all human beings with the dignity they deserve." The public handling of the Samson crisis was meticulously controlled to limit its political fallout. The congressional investigation was quietly wrapped up with a sanitized report that acknowledged irregularities in research practices but deliberately avoided disclosing the true scale of the enhancement experiments. Behind this carefully managed facade, however, a transformative, secret accord had been forged, one that not only ended the immediate conflict but also permanently altered the trajectory of human experimentation and civil rights in the United States. Dr. Kleinman, along with other prominent figures involved in the program, was relocated to isolated research facilities where they continued their scientific work under stringent oversight, but without access to human test subjects. The enhanced individuals who opted for integration were quietly dispersed across the northern states, where they built new lives under assumed identities. Many became prosperous farmers, skilled craftsmen, or small business owners using their extraordinary abilities in subtle ways that avoided drawing undue attention. A number of them took active roles in the Underground Railroad, employing their heightened skills to assist enslaved people in their perilous journeys to freedom. Those who chose separation founded settlements in Alaska that became renowned among the territory's indigenous populations for their strength, wisdom, and unwavering commitment to justice. These secluded communities maintained discreet contact with one another and with select government officials, serving as both a living testament to the consequences of the enhancement experiments and a potential resource in times of national emergency. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of the Samson crisis was its profound impact on federal policy concerning human experimentation. The Washington Compact contained provisions that laid the groundwork for the first ethical framework governing government-sponsored medical research, principles that would later evolve into the modern standards of informed consent and protections for human subjects. Though these guidelines were initially classified, they quietly shaped research practices for decades, preventing similar crises from arising in the future. When the Civil War erupted less than 2 years after the resolution of the Samson crisis, its scale of death and upheaval quickly overshadowed the story of the enhanced individuals in the public consciousness. The narrative of a few dozen extraordinary people seemed insignificant in comparison to the nation's broader struggle. Government documents related to the enhancement program were sealed, buried in archives that would remain untouched for more than a century. Yet the influence of Samson and the enhanced community extended far beyond their immediate moment in history. The Alaskan settlements they established blossomed into hubs of knowledge and innovation, pioneering advances in engineering, medicine, and agriculture that would ultimately enrich the entire region. Among those who had chosen integration, several became pivotal figures in the abolitionist movement, leveraging their abilities and unique perspectives to help dismantle the same system of slavery that had enabled their exploitation. More importantly, the Samson crisis proved that human dignity and individual rights could prevail against even the most advanced mechanisms of control and oppression. These enhanced individuals did more than escape. They directly challenged the ideological foundations that had justified their subjugation. As the decades passed and the details of the enhancement program were gradually erased from mainstream history, the tale of Samson transformed into legend. Yet in certain circles, among scholars of government ethics, civil rights advocates fighting against medical abuses, and indigenous communities in Alaska who remembered their extraordinary neighbors, the legacy of the enhanced remained vivid. Their story endured as a testament to both humanity's capacity for cruelty and its power for moral redemption. The handprints Samson left embedded in the oak beams of the Rutland Plantation carriage house lingered for decades after the building's abandonment, a tangible reminder of the night one man's defiance ignited a crisis that reshaped the course of American history. Those who visited the ruins often described being struck by a sense of reverence upon seeing the impressions, an acknowledgement not of fear, but of the immense strength required to defy not just physical chains, but an entire social system built on dehumanization. This mystery stands as a stark reminder that the greatest atrocities in human history rarely stem from supernatural forces, but from ordinary individuals choosing to deny the humanity of others for their own gain. And yet, it also affirms that the innate human drive for dignity and freedom is a power greater than any enhancement, any oppressive structure, or any attempt to reduce people to property. What are your thoughts on this story? Do you believe the full truth has come to light? Or do secrets still lie hidden within the government's sealed archives? Share your theories in the comments below. We'd love to hear what you think happened to Samson and the other enhanced individuals. If this story of hidden history and human resilience resonated with you, make sure to subscribe, tap the notification bell, and share it with others who value exploring the darker, more complex corners of America's past. There are countless, forgotten chapters still buried, and together, we'll continue to bring them to light. Join us in the next video as we uncover another mystery the powerful would rather keep in the shadows.